The series opens on the island of the Outer Banks, located in the Atlantic Ocean. The island is divided into two distinct parts, one reserved exclusively for the wealthy, known as the Figure 8 neighborhood, and another designated for ordinary residents, the working class side. We are then introduced to four teenage friends. The first is JJ, whose father Luke works as a laborer at a fishing gear supply shop, although he is widely known as a thief who used to steal equipment, which led to his dismissal long ago. JJ mirrors his father in many ways, including his tendency towards stealing. The second is Pope, the most intelligent among them. He excels academically, to the point that he has earned a scholarship scheduled to begin soon. His lifelong dream is to become a forensic pathologist. Meanwhile, Pope spends most of his time helping his father Hayward, whose job involves delivering orders from the wealthy to their neighborhood. The third is Kiara, the daughter of a wealthy man named Ward, a member of the upper class. Nevertheless, Kiara despises rich kids because of their bad behavior, and instead prefers spending her time with this group. Meanwhile, she devotes a large part of her time to helping her father with one of his most important projects, a large restaurant. The fourth is John B., a 15-year-old boy whose father, Big John, disappeared at sea about 9 months earlier. As a result, the police declared him dead, and John B.'s guardianship was transferred to his uncle Tanny, who is away traveling for work most of the time. Meanwhile, John B. takes advantage of his absence by allowing the rest of the group to stay overnight with him at their cabin. After a while, however, the authorities discover that Tanny is frequently traveling, so they decide to move John B. into foster care or place him with an adoptive family, since he is still a minor. John B. lies to them, claiming that his uncle is in constant contact with him and will be returning very soon. He does this because he refuses to believe his father is dead and remains convinced that he is still alive, but somehow unable to return home. The social worker then informs him that someone will visit the house the next day, and if his uncle is not present, John B. will be transferred immediately to foster care. The following day, a powerful hurricane strikes the island, causing widespread destruction. Meanwhile, John B. seizes the opportunity and calls the social worker to postpone the visit. The day after that, the hurricane subsides, but it leaves behind heavy damage, including fallen trees and destroyed building facades. Then suddenly, the electricity is cut off across the entire island without exception. Because of these conditions, the four friends decide to take a boat out to fish, since such circumstances increase the likelihood of fish gathering at shallow depths, making it easier to catch large quantities. On the way, they pass several boats that were destroyed by the hurricane, while their owners stand devastated after losing their only source of income. As they approach their fishing spot, the boat collides with a rocky formation and comes to an abrupt stop. From the force of the impact, JJ falls off the boat, but he is not injured. At that moment, Pope notices something unusual in the water. When he focuses more closely, he realizes it is a sunken boat. The group assumes there may be bodies below, so they decide to dive down to retrieve them. Once they reach the wreck, they find no bodies. Instead, they discover that it is an extremely expensive boat, the kind rarely owned by anyone outside the wealthy class. This makes them wonder what such a boat was doing in their area. John B. then decides to dive again. This time, he finds a key to a hotel room with the hotel's name engraved on it. As a result, they conclude that the boat's owner must have been staying at that hotel, and they decide to go there to find out who the man was. Meanwhile, a body floats in the water not far from them, but none of them notices it. In the wealthy part of the island, we see a poor woman named Lana visiting a rich man named Cameron at his home. She has come to ask about her husband Scooter, who was Cameron's friend and who disappeared during the hurricane. Cameron then asks his eldest daughter, Sarah, about Scooter. Sarah says that she saw him shortly before the hurricane when he was helping her with something related to the boat, but afterward he left, and she has no idea what happened to him. Meanwhile, the boys arrive at the hotel and discover that it has been empty since the hurricane, as people panicked and everyone returned to their homes. As a result, John B. and JJ decide to enter the room themselves, while Kiara and Pope are assigned to secure the area outside. Once John B. and JJ reach the room, they find a safe with its combination written on a piece of paper nearby. Inside the safe, they discover a large amount of cash, with a handgun placed next to it. JJ is thrilled by the gun, since it is the first time he has ever held a weapon. While they are examining it, suddenly the police arrive at the hotel, heading to search the very same room. Meanwhile, Pope and Kiara try to warn them by throwing rocks at the window. At the last possible moment, John B. notices the warning. Quickly, they grab the gun and a small portion of the money, then escape through the window. However, fearing that the police might hear them while they flee, the two remain hanging silently outside the window without making a sound. The police then search the room, and surprisingly, they steal the remaining money for themselves before leaving the place. Afterward, the four friends regroup. Pope becomes anxious when he learns that they took the gun, fearing that the police might find out and that he could lose his scholarship. JJ reassures him, telling him that they are all in this together now. Meanwhile, the police discover Scooter's body floating in the water. The boys then realize that Scooter is the owner of the sunken boat they found earlier, the same boat the police are now searching for everywhere. The four friends gather at John B's house and decide to forget everything they witnessed, as if nothing ever happened. However, JJ has a different opinion. He finds it strange that a poor man like Scooter could afford such an expensive boat. As a result, he assumes Scooter must have been involved in drug dealing. JJ then convinces his friends to return to the marsh where they found the wreck and search it. If they find any contraband, it would belong to them and they could profit from it. And if they find nothing, they lose nothing. After much hesitation, the others finally agree. To make their plan complete, they decide to invite the local kids out for beers so that if they disappear afterward to carry out their mission, no one will notice their absence or become suspicious, especially since this is a small village where nothing stays hidden. They prepare the drinks and head to the square, the largest gathering spot for young people on the island, where many wealthy kids, many poor kids, and a large number of tourists all come together. During this time, the working class residents suffer from mistreatment by the wealthy, as many of the rich island residents are arrogant and act as if the island belongs only to them. Then, while the party is in full swing, they are surprised by the arrival of Sarah, one of the most well-known daughters of the wealthy families, who comes to celebrate with her friends. Topper, her boyfriend, arrives with her. We then learn that Kiara and Sarah used to be very close friends, but a conflict once broke out between them. Since then, they have not spoken at all, to the point that Kiara now feels uncomfortable with the idea of being in the same place as her. During the party, a misunderstanding breaks out between John B. and Topper, and the situation quickly escalates into a fight. Topper manages to overpower John B. and even begins to drown him in the water. Meanwhile, JJ steps in and, using the gun he has, fires several shots into the air to scare everyone off and save his friend. As a result, the party immediately disperses, and everyone rushes home. However, the real problem now is that they have revealed the gun they were trying to keep secret, and it could now be what exposes them. The next morning, John B. wakes up to the sound of Officer Susan at his house. She has come to discuss the guardianship issue. Susan is very sharp, and from the bruises on his face, she quickly realizes that he was involved in a fight the night before with the rich kids. Meanwhile, she sets aside the guardianship topic and starts asking about the fight. John B. admits that a fight did happen, but firmly denies that there was any gun involved. Then Susan changes the subject and bluntly asks whether he and his friends went near the sunken boat and searched the wreck. It becomes clear that she already knows everything and is only there to confirm it. John B. denies knowing anything and pretends to be surprised, but Susan does not believe him. She then promises to help him with the guardianship situation if he stays away from the marsh where the wreck is located. After that, John B. rushes to warn his friends about what he has learned and tells them that he has decided to follow the officer's advice so he can avoid being placed in foster care. However, JJ has a different opinion. He believes that if they search the wreck and find any contraband, they could sell it, move from being poor to being rich, and at that point, the police would have no power over them and would not be able to force guardianship on John B. Eventually, the others are convinced by his argument and decide to ignore Susan's warning. John B.'s task now is to steal diving equipment from Cameron's boat, Sarah's father. Since John B. has been working for him for a long time, he has all the keys and is able to take the equipment easily. However, they soon discover that the oxygen in the gear is only enough for one person, so they head back to the wreck, and John B. decides that he will be the one to dive. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard manages to locate the wreck, so they prepare several boats to move out as soon as possible to retrieve it. Coincidentally, one of the investigators passes by the marsh while John B. is underwater searching the ship for any contraband. The investigator grows suspicious, noticing that the fourth boy who is usually with them is missing. However, after searching the boat and finding nothing, he leaves. John B. sees everything from below, so the moment the investigator departs, John B. resurfaces immediately, carrying with him a black bag he found inside the boat's storage compartment. Before they can open it, they are suddenly startled by a boat with two men heading toward the marsh. The men begin chasing them, but Kiara saves the situation by throwing something into the water, causing the boat to hit it and slow down. Once the group reaches the shore, they open the bag with great excitement, only to be shocked to find it empty, containing nothing but a compass. John B. is the the only one who is happy because it is his father's compass, which his father had inherited from his own family long ago. After that, John B. goes to return the equipment to Cameron's boat and is surprised to find Sarah asleep there. She realizes that he has been stealing from her father, yet she promises to cover for him so he will not get fired. It becomes clear that she is kind-hearted and does not like to hurt anyone. However, at the same time, her younger sister Wheezy is also on the boat and overhears everything. She immediately runs to tell Topper what happened, fearing that these boys could pose a danger to her family. Meanwhile, John B. and his friend JJ reunite, both puzzled by how Big John's compass ended up on Scooter's boat. As a result, they decide to visit Lana, Scooter's wife, at her home to question her. As soon as they arrive, they spot the same two men who had been chasing them the day before, now beating Lana in an attempt to force her to reveal the location of the compass. She breaks down in tears, insisting that she knows nothing. Meanwhile, the boys wait until the men leave. Then they go inside to check on Lana. John admits that they found the compass and asks why it was on Scooter's boat. Completely shaken, Lana urges him to take the compass and disappear before anyone finds out that he has it. Her reaction alarms them, confirming that the situation is far bigger than they initially believed. Later, the four friends regroup at John B.'s house to discuss everything that happened. John explains that his father was obsessed with the Merchant Royal, a legendary ship that sank long ago in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. His father spent many years studying records and charts to determine the ship's current resting place, since it was carrying gold worth more than $400 million, making it a target for anyone who knew its story. For the first time since his father disappeared, John decides to enter his father's office, puzzled as to why people would risk so much for a compass worth less than $5. Once inside, they find a board listing the names of everyone who previously owned the compass, starting with John's ancestors. It is written that each owner died shortly after obtaining it, before the compass passed on to his son, continuing this pattern until it reached John's father, whose fate remains unknown. John explains that his family always hid secret notes inside the compass. He opens it and discovers the words Redfield engraved inside in his father's handwriting. From this, John realizes that his father was trying to send him a message, and he decides to follow it. Meanwhile, as they are talking, they are suddenly surprised when the same two men arrive at the house and begin searching it. Pope quickly opens a window, and all four of them escape. The men then steal all of John's father's research, pointing to the location of the Royal Merchant, and leave. John explains that Redfield is the name of the lighthouse in their village, so he decides to go there, hoping to find another clue. JJ and Pope stay outside to secure the area, while John and Kiara go inside to speak with the lighthouse keeper. John asks him about the Royal Merchant. The man says that most people believe the wreck lies near the southern tip of the Cape, but after carefully studying the coordinates, he is convinced that the ship actually sank to the north, about 16 kilometers offshore. Then, John takes out the compass and asks whether the man understands what his father meant by carving Redfield into it. However, the lighthouse keeper assumes John is drunk based on his behavior and calls the police. Panicking, John strikes the glass and runs. At that moment, the police arrive. JJ and Pope panic, jump into the car, and drive away. John and Kiara keep running until they are far from the area, but Officer Susan eventually finds them and takes them to the police station. Being a sharp officer, she has already figured out that John found the compass. She offers him a deal. If he hands it over to the police, she will protect him from being placed in foster care. John denies knowing anything about the compass and refuses to cooperate. Shortly afterward, Kiara's father, Ward, arrives and posts bail to get them released. Meanwhile, John returns to work, only to discover that Cameron has found out about the stolen equipment, so he fires him immediately. On his way home, John is suddenly shocked to see the same two men chasing him again. At the last moment, Susan appears, and as soon as the men notice her, they flee. Susan takes John into her car, and this time she forces him to hand over the compass in exchange for protecting him from those men. John returns home, shaken and emotionally drained. For the first time, he decides to listen to the people around him and accept that his father is truly dead. His first reaction is to gather his father's personal belongings to burn them. However, by pure coincidence, he comes across a family tree chart. Through it, John discovers that his great-great-grandmother's last name was Redfield. He immediately realizes that this was what his father meant when he carved the name into the compass. John contacts the rest of the group and decides they should go to her grave, hoping to find something there. Since Kiara is the smallest and slimmest among them, she volunteers to climb down and search inside. Once she gets in, she finds finds a message addressed using John's childhood nickname, the one his father used to call him by. They take the message and rush back to the house. Inside, they discover a complex map designed by John's father, carefully marking the location he had reached after years of research, the spot where the wreck of the Royal Merchant is supposed to be. They also find an audio recording in which John's father says that he has finally discovered the ship's location and asks his son to investigate it himself if anything happens to him. The four friends are overwhelmed with excitement. They decide that if they actually find the ship, they will split the $400 million among the four of them. Each one begins imagining what they would do with the money, and they spend the night together, filled with hope and excitement. The next day, Cameron sits down with his son Rafe, a reckless young man who lives off his father's money and spends it carelessly. Cameron argues with him over his irresponsibility and threatens to cut him off financially if he does not start working soon. As soon as Rafe leaves, he goes straight to a drug dealer named Barry to buy a large amount of marijuana. Rafe is used to buying from him, so he can resell to his wealthy friends and make a profit. However, this time he does not have the money, so he leaves his motorcycle as collateral, planning to come back and pay once he sells the entire batch. Meanwhile, the four friends begin preparing for their expedition to the Royal Merchant. JJ suggests using a small underwater drone designed for filming beneath the surface, so they can confirm whether the ship is really there without putting anyone in danger. He knows a specific place where they can steal the drone. They head there together, and Kiara uses her intelligence to distract the security guard by asking him to change her car tire, giving the others enough time to steal the equipment and escape. The following day, Pope and JJ go to the wealthy neighborhood to deliver food orders. Each of them is assigned to a different household. Suddenly, Pope runs into Topper and Rafe, who are still seeking revenge for the earlier fight. Rafe approaches Pope and beats him brutally, then leaves him bleeding on the ground. Driven by anger and a desire for revenge, Pope decides to sabotage Topper's family boat, an extremely expensive vessel and the only one of its kind on the island. With JJ's help, Pope damages the boat, causes it to sink, and then leaves. However, he makes JJ promise not to tell the others, fearing that if the incident reaches the police, his scholarship could be revoked. After that, the four of them prepare for the mission. Using John's father's map, they manage to reach the location with ease. JJ takes on the task of piloting the boat, while Pope and John focus on pinpointing the shipwreck's location, according to the map. Meanwhile, Kiara's role is to lower the underwater drone to determine whether there is actually anything below. Kiara continues lowering the drone until it reaches a depth of 250 meters beneath the surface. Suddenly, something unusual appears on the screen aboard the boat. However, when they take a closer look, they realize it is nothing more than a large school of fish. After an extensive search, they conclude that the area is empty. Disappointed and frustrated, each of them returns home feeling defeated. Later, John is shocked to find the foster care supervisor waiting at his house, accompanied by a police officer who has come to take him by force and place him in foster care. On the way, John tricks them by throwing a photo of his father out of the car window, claiming it fell accidentally and insisting that it is the only picture he has of him, which is why he is so attached to it. The supervisor believes him and allows him to get out with the officer to look for it. Instead, John deceives them, escapes, and then steals a bicycle so he can get away from the area as quickly as possible. However, along the way, he crashes into a metal chain, falls, and injures himself. Coincidentally, Sarah happens to pass by at that moment. She feels sorry for him and gives him a ride to help him escape. Then she takes him back to her house to treat his wound, deliberately sneaking him in without her family's knowledge, knowing they would be upset if they found out he was there, especially since he is now seen by them as nothing more than a thief. While she is tending to his injury, John notices a photograph of a strange-looking man hanging on the wall. Sarah explains that the man's name is Denmark, and that he was the one who long ago bought a large portion of the wealthy Figure 8 neighborhood, paying for it with gold whose origin no one ever knew. At that moment, John suddenly realizes he has heard that name before. When he pulls out the map he has with him, he discovers that Denmark was one of the passengers aboard the Royal Merchant, who were all believed to have drowned with the ship. From this, John concludes that Denmark must have been the sole survivor, and he decides to follow this lead to uncover the location of the gold. Sarah tells him that Denmark's personal belongings are currently stored in an archive inside the city museum. John decides they need to go there, but Sarah explains that the city is reserved for the wealthy and that entry requires special permission. Driven by curiosity and a desire to do something meaningful with her life, Sarah decides to go with him, even without fully understanding the situation. They arrive at the marina, where they are supposed to board the boat to the city, only to discover that all the tickets have been sold out. As a result, they impersonate workers and hide inside the engine room. Once the boat reaches the city, they quickly slip out before anyone can report them. Then they head to a clothing store, where Sarah picks out elegant outfits for both of them, since their clothes were ruined during the journey, and they would not be able to enter the museum looking like that. Afterward, they go to the museum, where they convince an employee that they are tourists interested in learning more about Denmark. Through his personal belongings, they discover that he was executed because he used the gold he had to buy enslaved people and set them free. He was accused of rebellion and sentenced to death. On the very day of his execution, he left behind a message for his son, written in a rare language they cannot translate. John takes a photo of the message and keeps it. On their way back, both of them feel a sense of sadness at the thought of returning to their normal lives. For the first time, John realizes that Sarah is very different from the image he and his friends had of wealthy kids. It becomes clear that they are starting to develop feelings for each other. After much hesitation, Sarah finally confesses her feelings, revealing that she had already wanted to break up with Topper. However, they decide to keep their relationship a secret, since one of the island's most important unwritten rules is that no one from the working class side is allowed to be romantically involved with someone from the wealthy neighborhood. At that point, Topper's father discovers that their boat has sunk. Through security camera footage, the police realize that one of the four boys is responsible, since they spot Hayward's boat, Pope's father's vessel, at the scene. As a result, they conclude that Pope is the one who did it and move to arrest him. The officer tells Pope that he will be sent to jail since he is over 16, which is the legal age in their area. Meanwhile, JJ sympathizes deeply with his friend and is devastated by the thought that Pope could go to prison and lose his scholarship. Because of this, JJ decides to take the blame and falsely confesses that he was the one who sabotaged the boat. Consequently, the police arrest JJ and take him into custody on charges of damaging private property. At the same time, the police receive a report that 2 bodies have been found floating in the water. After the autopsy, it is revealed that they belong to the same 2 men who had been chasing John and his friends. The medical examiner explains that their bodies show multiple stab wounds and concludes that they were not drowned accidentally. Instead, whoever killed them stabbed them first, then dumped them into the water as shark bait to make it look like a natural incident. An officer gathers all the evidence and brings it to Susan, explaining that among Scooter's belongings, they found photographs related to the royal merchant. They also discovered similar photographs with the 2 dead men, which means that all 3 of them were searching for the ship, and all 3 ultimately met the same fate. We then return to JJ at the police station, where Susan enters and tells him that the 2 men who were after John have been eliminated. This means that John is now in serious danger. Susan already knows that they are searching for the royal merchant, so she offers JJ a deal. If he brings John in to confess everything he knows about the ship, she will try to get him out of this situation. After that, Luke, JJ's father, arrives. As JJ's legal guardian, he signs an agreement stating that he will pay for the damages to the destroyed boat, which amount to nearly $30,000. As soon as they get into the car, Luke brutally beats his son, furious that JJ has cost them such a large sum of money because of what he sees as stupidity. Meanwhile, John visits his history teacher and asks him to translate Denmark's letter so he can understand its meaning. The letter turns out to be a farewell message from Denmark Tanny to his son. However, at the end of the letter, Denmark asks him to harvest the wheat from plot number 9. Since no man facing execution would realistically be thinking about harvesting crops, John realizes that the message is coded and that Denmark was trying to reveal the location of the gold to his son. John then goes to see JJ and tells him everything he has discovered. Later that same day, the wealthy residents gather in their neighborhood to celebrate the Midsummer Festival. Kiara attends the party as one of the rich kids, while Pope is also there with his father, delivering orders to the guests during the event. John and JJ decide to enter as well. JJ disguises himself as a waiter and slips into the party. He then approaches Sarah and hands her a note written by John, asking her to meet him privately because he needs her help. Sarah agrees and meets John, who confides in her about the treasure and explains that he has figured out where it is. He tells her that the only thing left is to obtain a map of the wealthy neighborhood so he can identify exactly where plot number 9 is located. Sarah reassures him, telling him that the map is kept in her father's office. She promises to sneak in after the party, retrieve it, and then meet John later at a cabin by the sea. Meanwhile, Topper notices that Sarah is talking privately with someone unfamiliar. When he confronts her, Sarah denies it and claims she was simply speaking to a friend. Shortly after, the four friends regroup and John explains everything he has discovered. Kiara becomes upset when she learns that Sarah knows about the treasure, believing that Sarah is nothing more than a greedy girl who only cares about money. John reassures them, saying he is only pretending to like Sarah in order to get what he needs and will leave her afterward. After the party ends, John goes to the cabin to meet Sarah. She hands him the map she managed to find. At that moment, she realizes that Topper has been watching her, trying to figure out who she has been meeting behind his back. Topper completely loses control when he realizes she prefers one of those boys over him. He attacks John violently, shoving him with such force that John falls from the cabin, which is at a significant height, and loses consciousness. The next day, John wakes up in the hospital and discovers that Sarah stayed with him overnight. He also learns that she told her father, Cameron, about the guardianship issue. Cameron decides to forgive John for everything that happened and even offers to adopt him. John is overjoyed, not only because he has known them for a long time, but also because he is finally getting a chance to experience the life of the wealthy. Once he recovers, Cameron takes John to his villa, where he bluntly asks why John wanted the map and whether he is obsessed like his father, searching for the same ship. John denies all of it, explaining that he simply loves history and wanted to learn more about the island. Afterward, John takes the map and goes to meet his three friends. Together, they realize that many landmarks on the island have changed over time, which will make their task much harder. As a result, they decide to look for buildings that have existed since Denmark's era, more than 100 years ago, locate them on the old map, and compare them with the island's current layout in order to pinpoint the exact location of plot number 9 mentioned in Denmark's letter. After extensive research, they finally identify the plot of land, only to discover that it belongs to a woman named Queen. Fear immediately sets in, since her husband disappeared years ago, and many people believe she was responsible for his death. JJ interrupts, explaining that Queen's daughter Halsey was once his babysitter and was always haunted by her past. One night during her childhood, Halsey overheard her parents arguing violently. Later, she went into their room and saw her mother washing blood off her hands, claiming she had merely injured herself. The next morning, Halsey found her father's severed head placed in one of the mansion's bathrooms, one that no one ever used. From that day on, she lived in constant terror of her mother and was too afraid to tell anyone what she had seen. Despite their fear of Queen, the treasure matters more to them. Quietly, they sneak into the garden and discover a small shack that clearly no one ever enters. There, Pope notices an unusually large number of mosquitoes, leading him to suspect something beneath the floor. When he lifts one of the wooden planks, they discover a well underneath. John immediately recalls Denmark's message about harvesting wheat near the water, realizing they are extremely close to the treasure. Still, they decide to leave for now and return later with a long rope. After everything that has happened, John decides to bring Sarah into the group. The problem now is that Sarah and Kiara are still at odds, each refusing to accept the other's presence. Using his cleverness, John traps them both on a boat in the middle of the water, having already sabotaged it beforehand. He leaves them there for an entire day, forcing them to talk things out. Eventually, the plan works, and they both apologize for what happened in the past, becoming friends again. Now the five of them are ready to break into Queen's property. As soon as they arrive, they discover motion-sensitive floodlights. Kiara and Sarah decide to enter the house to cut the power, while the three boys head toward the shack. Once the electricity is shut off, the boys secure John with a rope and lower him into the well to search for the treasure. John reaches the bottom, only to find the well completely empty. He panics when he discovers a human jawbone. Gripping the rocks in terror, he tries to climb back up. Suddenly, one of the stones shifts and falls away, revealing a hidden passage that leads to a secret chamber. John enters the chamber and is stunned to find the treasure he has been searching for. Gold bars stacked inside. At that exact moment, Queen senses movement in the house and rushes toward the shack to investigate. However, the five friends are faster, and because Queen is blind, they manage to escape without difficulty. On the way, John tells them everything he found and shows them a gold bar he brought as proof. They burst with excitement, already thinking about how they will get the rest of the treasure out. Meanwhile, Barry, the drug dealer, begins threatening Rafe with death if he does not return the money. Desperate, Rafe steals a watch from his father's safe, but Cameron catches him and forces him to confess everything. Cameron then takes the money himself and insists on going with his son to see Barry. At the meeting, Cameron leaves Rafe in the car and goes in alone to hand over the cash. Before leaving, Cameron gets into a violent confrontation with Barry, then warns him to stay away from his son and never deal with him again. The next day, John and Sarah are walking through the garden, talking about everything they have uncovered. By coincidence, Cameron overhears their conversation through his office window and realizes that they have reached the treasure. It becomes clear that Cameron is also deeply interested in the story, so he begins devising a new plan to delay the 5 of them and keep them away from the gold. He approaches John and invites him on a fishing trip the following day, explaining that they are now practically family, yet they still do not know much about each other. Sarah is happy that her father is trying to bond with John, and she convinces him to agree. Later, the 5 friends regroup, and their new plan is to buy a lifting machine so they can extract the gold from the well. They decide to sell the gold bar they have to pay for the equipment. However, the employee at the shop is shocked by the size of the bar, especially since this is a poor town, and it is the first time she has ever seen something like it. She takes it to show the shop owner, who turns out to be Barry, the drug dealer. Barry instructs her on what to tell the group. She returns and tells them that there is no cash available at the shop and gives them an address where they can exchange the bar for money. They drive off quickly, but on the road, they are suddenly stopped by a car. A masked man steps out, points a gun at them, and forces them out of their vehicle. He searches the car himself and takes the gold bar. As he turns back toward his car to escape, John reacts first, running to stop him before he can get away. The 5 of them manage to overpower the man and recover their gold. Before leaving, they pull off his mask, and JJ recognizes him as Barry. From this, they realize that the employee deceived them. JJ decides to retaliate. He takes Barry's card, learns his address, and they leave him lying on the ground. JJ then insists on driving and takes them straight to Barry's house. There, he finds a bag containing around $25,000. He wants to steal all the money as revenge. Although the other 4 strongly object, they are unable to stop him. When JJ senses that his friends are starting to resent him and reject his behavior, he takes the bag of money and leaves on his own. JJ returns home with the cash and, emotionally shaken, tells his father that he managed to secure the compensation money so he would not have to worry anymore. However, his father is selfish and shows no concern for his son. Instead, he decides to take the money for himself. A violent argument breaks out between them until JJ's father forcefully grabs the bag and runs off with it. Meanwhile, Barry realizes he has been robbed. He goes straight to Rafe's house, confronts him, and threatens that if Sarah and her friends do not return the money, he will kill them. Topper overhears everything and is clearly shocked by Sarah, the girl he had loved for months. The next day, John goes out on the boat with Cameron. Once they are far from shore, Cameron decides, for the first time in his life, to be honest. He tells John that he knows everything about the treasure and knows that they have already located it. He adds that, no matter where it is, extracting that much gold will be extremely difficult. Cameron then takes advantage of the moment and offers to help them recover the treasure in exchange for a large share. John refuses and denies knowing anything about it. However, as Cameron keeps pressing him, he slips and mentions Redfield. John immediately becomes suspicious, wondering how Cameron knows that name, and realizes that Cameron must have had a connection to his father and must have seen the compass with the message. Suddenly, Cameron realizes his mistake and tries to change the subject, but John now knows that something is very wrong. He insists that they return home immediately. Moments later, John is horrified to see Cameron pull out a spear, intending to kill him. Cameron chases him for a long time, but John eventually manages to escape by grabbing a jet ski from the boat and fleeing. John then decides to visit Lana at her home to learn the full truth. Lana tells him that about a year earlier, Cameron had come to their house in a state of panic. He took Scooter aside and confessed everything. We learn that Cameron and Big John were once friends, and that Cameron had been helping Big John with all the tools he needed to reach the treasure. However, when Cameron got close to finding it, Big John felt entitled to the money after searching for it for more than 20 years. He offered Cameron only 20%, keeping the rest for himself. Cameron refused. During their argument, Big John accidentally fell and struck his head against the boat. Cameron assumed he was dead and panicked. He later found a map in Big John's pocket showing the treasure's location, took it, and after long deliberation, decided to dump the body into the water to cover up his crime. Shortly afterward, Cameron went to Scooter's house and told him what had happened. Together, Cameron and Scooter searched every location marked on the map, but found nothing. Then, the hurricane came. There was only one last island left to search, and Scooter took on that task. When Scooter reached the island, he found a decomposed body lying there with the compass beside it. He realized that it was Big John's body, and that when Big John had been thrown into the water, he was not yet dead. He had crawled until he reached the island, where he eventually died. Scooter takes the compass and leaves, but on his way back, a violent storm breaks out. His life comes to an end as the boat sinks with him. John hears all of this in shock. Overwhelmed by grief and rage, he rushes home, grabs his gun, and decides to kill Cameron to avenge his father. However, as soon as he gets there, Sarah tells him that Cameron has already filed a report against him, accusing him of attacking him on the boat. Realizing the danger, John decides to go back home and think carefully before acting. Meanwhile, Cameron sits down with his daughter and begins poisoning her against John. He tells her that John is not a good person, that he has only just discovered his true nature, and he lies by claiming that John tried to kill him while they were alone on the boat. He then advises her to stay away from him completely. Later that night, Cameron is working late in his office when he comes across an advertisement for a house on the island that is up for sale. He learns that the owner is a blind woman and that a group of young people had broken into her property some time ago, leaving her terrified and eager to sell. Cameron immediately realizes that this must be the house hiding the treasure, and he decides to act before anyone else does. The next day, John goes to Queen's house, only to find heavy equipment there. He quickly discovers that Cameron has already bought the property, stolen all the gold, and left. At the same time, Hayward drops Pope off for his scholarship interview, but apologizes that he cannot stay. This is because Cameron is about to leave town and has requested a team of workers to expand the runway at his private airstrip, as his plane carries a heavy load and needs more space to maneuver. Once inside the interview, Pope begins to piece everything together. He realizes that Cameron stole the gold and is planning to escape with it. Without hesitation, Pope abandons the interview and runs to warn his friends. He finds the others gathered and tells them everything he has learned. Immediately, the four of them head toward the airstrip. When they arrive, they are shocked to see that Cameron has already gotten there and that Sarah is with him, preparing to leave. Despite the danger, John decides to intervene, determined to save Sarah and reclaim the gold. He jumps into his car and chases the plane as it begins moving toward takeoff, forcing it to stop. John pulls Sarah away while he and Cameron get into a violent confrontation. At that moment, Susan arrives, having come to arrest Cameron after learning the full truth from Lana and realizing that Cameron was also responsible for killing the two men. She moves to arrest him. Suddenly, Rafe arrives, panicking over his father's fate. He pulls out a gun and shoots Susan. Everyone is stunned, especially Cameron, who realizes that his son's future has just been destroyed. John rushes towards Susan to check on her. Knowing the darkness inside Cameron better than anyone, Susan urges John to run before Cameron kills him as well. John listens and flees immediately. Fearing for his children, Cameron reacts quickly. He orders Rafe to force Sarah into the car and take her back home. Then, he calls a friend to take the plane to another country as fast as possible before anyone discovers that he found the treasure. After that, Cameron contacts the police, reports that Susan has been shot, and deceives them by claiming that John was the one who shot her before escaping. Because of John's reckless behavior over the past period, Officer Victor believes the story. He gathers all the officers at the station and announces a $25,000 reward for anyone who can locate John. The news spreads rapidly through the town, and people become eager for the reward, especially since the amount could change anyone's life. Meanwhile, Cameron returns home. Distrusting Sarah and fearing what she might do, he locks her in her room to make sure she cannot testify against Rafe. John, on the other hand, is hiding with his friends in a parked car on a side street. Since his face is now everywhere due to the reward announcement, one of the bystanders recognizes him and shouts that he has been found. A nearby police officer immediately radios in their location. The police begin chasing John and his friends until they corner them in a specific area. John jumps out of the car and runs. After a long chase, he breaks into the house of a wealthy resident. Unfortunately, it turns out to be Kelsey, a friend of Topper and Rafe. Kelsey already hates John, so he locks him inside the bathroom and leaves. He then runs to wake Topper, who is spending the night there, telling him to keep watch while he calls the police. Kelsey reports everything, and the police quickly surround the house. Victor enters alone to arrest John. However, when he opens the bathroom door, he finds that John has escaped through the ventilation shaft. At the same time, Sarah is trapped in her room. She manages to trick her younger sister, Wheezy, convincing her to sleep in her bed and cover herself with the blanket so that if Cameron comes in, he will think Sarah is still there. Sarah then escapes from the house, determined to save John after learning that the police are hunting him. Sarah guesses that John might be hiding at the church, the place where they used to meet all the time. She goes there and finds him, and with great difficulty, they manage to escape the police, who have completely surrounded the area. Sarah then takes John to an empty house she knows is up for rent, making it the safest possible place for them to spend the night. They stay there without any immediate danger. The next day, JJ notices that the police are still patrolling the island, which means they have not caught John yet and are still searching for him. The three boys agree to meet at the dock at 3 o'clock to help John escape. Pope's task is to get fuel, while Kiara and JJ are responsible for preparing JJ's father's boat so John can flee to another country. They specifically choose that boat because it is the fastest one they currently have. Meanwhile, Cameron sits at home, anxious that the police might uncover the truth. Rose reassures him, telling him that if they knew anything, they would have already come to arrest him. She even suggests that they leave the country and live somewhere else, especially after finally finding the treasure they had dreamed of for years. Cameron refuses to travel for now, fearing that leaving would only raise more suspicion and draw attention to him. At the same time, John wakes up to find a note from Sarah saying that she has gone to handle things on her own to help him. Sarah goes to the police to tell them the truth, but she finds her father there. To cover up his crime, Cameron tells the officer that Sarah is emotionally attached to the boy and is only trying to defend him by any means. Sarah is shocked by her father's behavior and quickly runs off to warn John, realizing that the situation is far more serious than she ever imagined. John immediately takes Sarah and leaves the house. Using paddleboards, they decide to move across the water to get farther away from the area. Halfway through, John says goodbye to her so he can return home quickly to retrieve the gold bar and prepare for his escape. He refuses to take Sarah with him because he fears for her safety. Sarah promises that she will wait for him at the dock at the agreed time so they can escape together, especially since she now feels completely alone after discovering the truth about her father. Meanwhile, Rafe is terrified of being arrested. In his desperation, he looks for anyone who can give him drugs to calm his nerves. He goes to Barry's house and begs him for a dose, even though he has no money. Barry takes advantage of his need and proposes that they hunt down John together to claim the reward. Rafe agrees, and the two set out together. On the road, they spot Kiara and JJ driving at high speed. Rafe assumes they are heading to meet John and decides to follow them. When JJ and Kiara reach the boat, they are once again confronted by Rafe and Barry, who attempt to attack them. If it were not for Pope's timely intervention, they would not have been able to fight them off. Afterward, the three take the boat and head to the dock to wait for John. At the same time, the police search John's house. When they find the gold bar, they load it into their car before continuing the search. Watching everything from a distance, John decides to steal the police car, recover the gold bar, and escape. His plan works. He drives straight to the dock, where he finds his friends waiting with the boat. John says goodbye to them, thanks them, and decides to take the boat and flee to Mexico, promising that they will join him within 2 months so they can all live together. John waits for Sarah at the dock as planned, but she does not arrive. Despite how much he loves her, he decides to leave anyway. Moments after he departs, the police arrive and arrest the three boys for questioning. Shortly afterward, John is stunned to discover that Sarah is waiting for him at another location. He is overjoyed that she is determined to be with him, even at great personal risk. The two of them head toward Mexico together. After several hours, John realizes that the police have spread out along the surrounding shores to capture him. He turns off the boat's lights to avoid being seen. Suddenly, the lighthouse beam sweeps across the water, alerting the police to their presence. More than 5 boats are dispatched to chase them. At the same time, a violent storm begins to form, one that is expected to sink many vessels. Despite the danger, John decides to head straight into the storm, terrified of going to prison. Sarah agrees, and they steer toward it. Cameron, who is with the police, tries to intervene and find a solution. Over the boat's radio, he pleads with John to turn back and let Sarah live a normal life. John, however, outsmarts him and exposes the truth, declaring that Cameron is the one who killed his father. Fearing for his daughter, Cameron remains silent, unable to object. The sheriff leans toward him and informs him that once this situation is over, he will be questioned. A short time later, the storm overturns John and Sarah's boat, throwing them both into the ocean. After an extensive search, the police assume they have died and inform their friends that they are now missing. The three boys collapse in grief, blaming the police for everything that happened. The next day, John wakes up drifting in the middle of the ocean, with Sarah asleep beside him. It is revealed that they managed to cling to part of the boat and, thanks to their life jackets, survived through the night. As they fear that their lives may still end there, they suddenly spot a large ship passing nearby. Sarah uses the gold bar to reflect the sunlight, successfully catching the crew's attention. The people aboard the ship spot them and rescue them. John then learns that the ship is heading to the Bahamas, the very same place where Cameron sent the plane carrying the gold bars. As a result, John and Sarah decide to go there and begin a new journey in search of the treasure.